record these for later playback. And we're going to talk today about the book Lead Like Jesus, Leadership Lessons. Any other announcements? Vicki, come over here and talk into the laptop too, Vicki.
Hi, everybody. Just wanted to announce Lois and Keith Galloway have graciously we are looking at ways to either bring in food or from the outside either or do whatever. So anyway, I'm being prompted here as usual. So anyway, we'll keep up with the
Okay, very good. And then there's an all-church meeting. Is it next Sunday? I think it is, isn't it? To talk about the goals of St. Andrew, and so that's right after the 10:30 service. That should be interesting for everybody. Okay. Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. Betty said there's a class this Tuesday on the Active Minds program about the electric grid, and talk about how vulnerable it is. Okay. All righty. Well, let's jump into this. See what this fella has to say are the lessons from Jesus. Ken Blanchard, many of you will remember, is also the author of The 1 Minute Manager, which was a huge, one of the first business blockbuster books 20 or 30 years ago now, and started that whole industry of business and management advice books. And so he apparently was not a Christian until after he wrote that book. And he tells a little bit in here about after he wrote that book and had quick success with it, he got to thinking, was that just me, or was somebody above helping me with success on that? And so it started him thinking about religion and its role in Jesus' example. Blanchard said, everything I've ever written or taught about effective leadership during the past 35 years, Jesus did to perfection. He said, Jesus is clear about how to lead, make a difference in the world by being effective servant leaders. And so that's a lot of what his book is about, how Jesus, of course, was more a servant leader than an autocratic leader. And he delineates those. So I'm going to go through some of the highlights of that book, and let's talk. Love to hear your thoughts too about things you've seen in leadership traits that you've experienced or observed, and U.S. presidents too, and some of our different styles there. Well, the first thing Blanchard does in this book is talk about the difference between lifetime leaders versus organizational leaders. He says life leaders act as leaders for lifetime relationships as parents, spouses, siblings, friends. Life leaders show how to solve family problems and priorities and make priorities about what needs to be done by whom and when. So he really has a section there about everybody, whether you know it or not, is a leader in your family and in your relationships. And then he contrasts that to organizational leaders who operate for a season in temporary relationships in companies with employees or colleagues. And he says an obvious difference is self-serving leaders versus servant leaders. Self-serving leaders spend time protecting or promoting their image, their programs, their possessions, their relationships. They see themselves often as above those that they serve, and they are likely to react from fear and defensiveness challenged. Servant leaders, on the other hand, see themselves as working for the people they serve. These leaders see their power as on loan from those they serve. They see feedback as helpful and not a threat. They prepare others to succeed them, and they don't protect their position forever. Jesus modeled the true servant leader by training and equipping his disciples for leadership. Especially, he points out scripture, John 4:12, where Jesus said, I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I call you friends, because everything I have learned from my Father, I have made known to you. And he's helping Peter walk on the water there. Joy says, would we call Jesus a born leader? That's one thing I was hoping we were going to talk about today. Where do you think he got his style, his thoughts? It doesn't really say in the Bible, does it? What do you think? I tend to think it was probably in his rabbinic classes, the example that they taught him how to question everything, and maybe the synagogue, the examples he saw there, but who knows? Yeah, I'm sorry, what did you start saying?
Well, remember when he was
I think he says, remember when he read the scrolls in the synagogue for the first time, and they were amazed at his authority. The Holy Spirit leading him. Yep. Good point. Also for those who don't know, I'm repeating into the laptop so the Zoomers can hear. We are going to have advanced technology here in the room, so we can see better and hear everyone better without me having to do this, but it's not installed yet by the church. What's anybody else think? Where do you think this came from Jesus? Maybe his father, his mother, or just from God and the Holy Spirit? Mm-hmm. 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 This is probably also from his parents. Yes. Some people are just natural leaders. Who knows where it comes from? Yeah. Any thoughts, Susan or Joe? Chime in whenever you want to. Okay. Blanchard goes on to say the term leader is mentioned 6 times in the Bible, while servant is mentioned 900 times. And then he starts to show other examples too, that Jesus affirmed that God looks for servants to follow him and focus on the kingdom of God. He chose Moses, a shy man, and Mary, a teenager who said, thy will be done, and Paul, a passionate man who was transformed. Each was a servant, and an unlikely servant. We all know and have heard about that. What do you think about that example of Mary as a leader, modeling servant leadership? Gary said that he believes servants are leaders by example, primarily. Okay. That's what the sermon was about today, about be childlike in service. Joy said we can't all be leaders, and we don't want to all be leaders. We all were, everybody would be fighting for power. By modeling more. Wanda said his parents were forced into the leadership role. And when we say less, sometimes it's more effective than talking too much. Another kind of overlooked thing in many of these leadership books is forgiveness as essential for leaders. And he has a chapter in this book where he says, Jesus really modeled patience and forgiveness for his disciples' failures. And even on the cross when he said, forgive them for they know not what they do. Leaders look beyond weakness and failures to forgive and train their followers. An example is Abraham Lincoln, who brought rivals into his cabinet. And there's that book about, isn't it called A Team of Rivals, about Lincoln. And famously, Lincoln said about his war secretary, who he disagreed with often, he said, I would hold his horse if he would work to end the Civil War. So it's a good example of how Lincoln rose above pettiness and tried to work with people that he disagreed with. So I thought I'd throw out the question here. How about, does that remind you of any leaders or bosses you've worked with or yourself? Or have you forgiven any employees or promptly fired employees and tried not to train them? And there's a picture of Lincoln, who had, I thought, kind of a kind face. He didn't look like a mean guy to me. Good picture. The wife kept him humble, Gene said. Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, as somebody who managed a department of a few people, I found it hard to forgive and try and train people when they wouldn't do what I asked them to do. Yeah. How about you? Any thoughts come to mind? Of course, Mary. Sure. Teachers are leaders. Yeah. Yeah. Forgiving children. Yeah.
Dave, when I was in business, I always felt that if I had an employee that messed up, it was my fault. I either hired the wrong employee or didn't make myself clear of what was expected or didn't train them well.
Joe said he maybe didn't train people well. And so that leads to problems too. Of course. Yeah. Sorry, Joy, go ahead.
Okay,
Joy said she had a boss, you could tell by the way he dressed what kind of leader he was going to be that day. Was it a three-piece suit or not? Yeah, that's an interesting clue. Yeah, good point. Okay. And then next chapter in this book, he talks about two main roles of leaders as modeled by Jesus. One is set a compelling vision to reach a destination, and two is implement ways to reach the destination and have clear values in that. Jesus' vision was two most important commandments are love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So believe that Jesus' vision was to serve God and neighbor, love people, forgive, and serve. And then I put on here too the vision statements of our church: eradicate social isolation and disconnection with transformation by Jesus. I didn't get that exactly right, and I didn't look it up since then. And the Church of the Resurrection in Kansas City, the big Methodist church, its vision statement is help non-believers and nominal believers become deeply committed Christians. And Blanchard says, like Jesus, your vision should always be committed service to the best interest of the other person. What do you think about mission statements? Are they helpful? Do we forget them? We got folks, some saying yes and some saying no, we don't really remember them, but they do serve a purpose. What do you think, Terry? Gary says a mission statement sets boundaries. If you don't have boundaries, you may run outside the boundaries. And you don't meet your purpose. Mhm. Mhm. Joey said, is the mission statement to be attainable? Or I think people are a little confused about that too. What's your mission statement, your vision statement, your goals, your purpose? Sometimes those all get kind of blurred, don't they? Yeah, to eradicate isolation is a hefty goal. Susan, I'm going to ask you in a minute to chime in if you don't mind, because I know you're in business and I'm sure you've thought a lot about this.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, my company has published our vision and mission and core values on our website, and we include those in all of our proposals. And we set that as kind of a baseline for all of our freelance associates that are part of our network. So yeah, it's part and parcel of what drives us.
John says they're hard to do right, but when you do, they're very helpful. He said he likes St. Andrew's mission statement. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Gene said mission statements are more about values than really goals. Go ahead, Vicki. Vicki said that when she and I, before we moved here, we were at the Church of Resurrection in Kansas City, and the pastor would often recite the mission statement from the pulpit and ask us to memorize it. Think about what it means. Yeah. He thought it was very helpful for the church.
One question I have.
Hello, Jim.
Hi. One question I have about leadership today. When I was in the working world, we'd have an annual review, and would write out what you thought about your own performance, and your boss, he wrote out about his views of your performance, and then you got together and discussed any differences that were there. And usually you'd find that you had pretty much the same view. But today, whenever you have a business transaction, they want you to fill out a questionnaire about the person that served you. And to me, I wonder about that. You know, it doesn't seem to me to be a good employee-employer relationship, because you're constantly being tested, you know. I wonder if that's good.
Tested.
I just question that myself.
Good question. Yeah, I wonder if Jesus
It's
had
too much oversight.
with each of his disciples. Thank you, Jim. It's a good point. And Terry said that in his company, everybody would evaluate themselves also.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, mine did. Mine did too. And didn't meet their own performance. People either underrated or overrated. So his company gave up on that because it wasn't accurate. Humble employees. He had very humble employees and they underrated themselves. Yeah. Yeah. Well, another part of this chapter, sorry, Terry. Asking why they underrated. He said most people tend to underrate themselves. You can only do better. And there's all kinds today, 360-degree ratings and all kinds. Yeah. Another Terry, forgive me for interrupting you. I'm just trying not to have too much dead space for the Zoom people here. Another part of this chapter says that a key activity of a servant leader is to act as a performance coach. Jesus empowered his followers to lead after he was gone. He actually did planning, probably daily coaching, and some kind of performance evaluation with his disciples. He provided direction and he set goals. And there are a few examples in the scriptures about that, where he talked to them about how they were doing. And then this chapter also talks about the stages of learning, that there's a novice, and I never really thought about these categories quite like this. The novice is someone who's just beginning. An apprentice is one in training. The journeyman is able to work independently, and the master is able to teach others. So the disciples went through those stages also. Some of them probably effectively, and some of them not. Gene. Yeah. Gene says a good leader plans to work himself out of a job, have a succession. Mm-hmm. 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 Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Vicki says that's analogous to parenting, to raise your kids up to be on their own. Mm-hmm. Another little book I saw similar to this was called Jesus CEO. And so a lady wrote this book and just had 5 main things I wanted to point out here that she thought were the lessons from Jesus. Number one was Jesus was in constant communication with his boss. Kind of a cute way to say it. Kept the boss informed on what he was doing. He acted with authority and confidence, but also as a servant with humility. And I thought that was good because I remembered, like Vicki said, he opened the scrolls and read from it and did it with confidence as though he knew really what he was talking about. Onset in Star Trek. Jesus could have used his great power, but he did it with humility. Yeah. True. There's a lot of leadership lessons from Star Trek, aren't there? Captain Kirk? Yeah. She said a lesson from Sam Walton. That Sam Walton would walk around the floor with his employees. Yep. He said he thought Jack Kennedy was a great leader. Not what you can do, but what you can do for your country. And the final two on this list were a clear vision and a message, and high energy. She saw Jesus as possessing these 5 lessons. And that's her little book there. When I did a search, I found many books like this, Jesus Leadership Lessons, as well as others that said, one of them was called Lead Like a Pirate. Use your team to take whatever you want, be ruthless, that kind of thing. So leadership lessons from pirates too. Yeah. Ron says that's where a clear vision comes in, a message about don't succeed at all costs with no values. Good point. Terry says a lot of companies or leaders are autocratic in that way. Well, final section here, like talk about is leadership styles of presidents and CEOs. And so this is, I think, 6 or 7 main styles. And let's talk about which presidents fall into these too. And some of them fall into multiple categories, including Trump and Obama and others. Number 1 is the transformational leader. These are growth-minded leaders that inspire followers through effective communication and really try to encourage intellectual stimulation. Transformational leaders focus on using the strength of vision, respond to their followers' needs, to motivate them toward common objectives. Transformational leaders focus on developing followers into leaders by unlocking their potential. And an example they gave was Ariana Huffington of the Huffington Post in California. She apparently cultivates a workplace that highly encourages creativity and innovation. And a more prominent, easily identified type is the charismatic leader. A powerful self-image motivates people by sheer force of personality. They rely on their charm, communication, and the power of conviction. These leaders have a distinct ability to dissect and decipher any efficiency and then problem solving. Richard Branson is a figurehead of this companies of the Virgin Group. Branson's personality, along with his business skills, put Virgin on the map. And then, of course, another one that they mention is Mr. Trump as being charismatic in his own way for his base. Whether you call that charisma or not, he certainly has influence with it and falls under that type. Any other presidents really strike you as charismatic? I thought Obama came across that way as being Ronald Reagan. Yes, John. Yeah. He was a good communicator. Harry Truman in his own way. Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah. Vicky said people want different things in a leader. Someone a strong, bossy leader, and someone a more down-to-earth leader. So it can be different kinds of charisma for different kinds of leaders. Hmm? Mm-hmm. Ricky's on to something important, Gene said. The context determines the type of charisma they need. Mm-hmm. Right person at the right time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Trump was that. Trump was right for his time. And we attack their charisma too, don't we? Yeah. Not many are calling Biden very charismatic today, but he's got his own style. Yeah.
I think having a sense of humor is an important element of leadership.
Yes, Jim, I agree. Terry says he thinks JFK was a very charismatic leader and set a vision also to go to the moon. Had a lot of those good leadership characteristics. Says in JFK helped move technology forward with his goal to get to the moon. Leadership style number 3 is called transactional leader. These are old school in their approach. These are the leaders that focus on a clear chain of command, using rewards and punishments to motivate their followers. They maintain formal positions of authority, monitoring performance and offering rewards or punishment for work and loyalty. Of course, when we use the word loyalty, we remember Mr. Trump demanding loyalty from his FBI director and others too. He certainly, excuse me, falls under the transactional leader, old school, as well as charismatic. He wouldn't. Yeah, he made them sign statements and pledge their loyalty to him. I wonder what he would think of servant leadership. You think he would laugh at that? I think he would. Yeah. I think he would think that it's kind of naive. You know, why do that kind of thing when you're the boss and you're in charge. Why listen to other people so much? Serve them. That's just my thought. He did listen to his dad. Yeah, his dad was probably a transactional guy too. Number 4, of course, is the servant leader. They operate in service of their followers. This style of leadership focuses on power sharing by prioritizing the needs of the followers and encouraging collective decision-making. They focus on diversity and strategic direction and boosting morale and enriching the lives of their followers. The main one is Nelson Mandela, who drove apartheid into the dust by supporting his community's vision to serve, lead, and aid his fellow community members to reach their full potential. He used his activism and later his political role to build the community. Of course, the one I thought about when you think of servant leader is Jimmy Carter building the homes. And this is a picture of him in Africa for some project. And then he also does vote monitoring in countries and does all kinds of things. And Rosalind does it with him too. And I think he still leads his Sunday school class in Plains, and they have, I read once, 20 buses a Sunday pull up to go to his Sunday school class. And yeah, you know, it's a tiny little church and you got all these buses of tourists and a hall that fills up for his Sunday school class. I would too. In fact, I've looked for reasons to go down there, but never really found any to go to Atlanta just so I could go to his class.
I think a bad aspect of leadership is to think you know everything. The idea of only I can do it, or I'm smarter than the generals.
Yes, I'm smarter than the generals or the doctor.
Smarter than everybody. That doesn't grow leadership. That stymies it, I think.
Yes. Yep. And that's, we're about to talk about that leadership style in just a second. John, were you going to say something? Yeah. John says that Mandela was really ahead of his time with his style. Yeah. Amazing example. Yep. Number 5 is the autocratic leader. It's basically the inverse of participative leadership. They have a significant control over their followers and rarely, if ever, consider workers' suggestions. The leader possesses total authority with a clear separation between leaders and followers in a highly structured direction that's controlled by the leader. So you may find distinguishing a tyrant from a leader difficult when it comes to his leadership style. Martha Stewart is renowned for being a perfectionist and demands the same of those that work for her. Stewart is also convinced of doing things the right way, and this translates into her business style, which focuses on highly regimented work structures, determined by Martha almost exclusively. You folks here are saying it's not surprising she spent some time in jail too for lying to the FBI about stock trades, things like that. So maybe she felt she was a little above telling them the truth. She knew what was right. Terry says, but in jail, she taught them how to cook. Uh-huh. Connie Dick says that Martha was at an event she was at, and Martha was very sweet to the audience during the event, but when it was over, she was awful when the focus was off of her being on the stage. People are Interesting. Interesting. Joy said that she had a friend who was a stewardess and that Lucille Ball was on her airplane and she was the worst person she ever had to deal with. Right. Don't ever meet your heroes. That's right. You'll be disillusioned. That's true. The last type of leader is the laissez-faire leader. Laissez-faire is French, translates to let them do. These leaders afford a great deal of autonomy and are hands-off in their work processes. They tend to hire experts who they trust to do certain work they see fit. Laissez-faire leaders operate on trust and only enter the scene to provide guidance and furnish their employees with resources when the need arises. And the example is Warren Buffett. He's a hands-off leadership style when it comes to his employees. I don't know how good that works for his company, but he can sure make the money and be successful. We know that. But there's probably good and bad to be said for a hands-off leader to some degree, I would think. What do you think happens in churches? Is one thought I had. Do you think pastors are good leaders, setting vision, motivating people, holding employees accountable? Anybody have impressions? Jim, you've been around churches a long time. Joyce, if you want to chime in, go ahead. Love to
Well,
hear.
I'll tell you, from my experience watching leaders, pastors,
Uh-huh.
it depends on the individual person. We had a pastor for some 30 years at a church in Philadelphia who was so uncomfortable in a small group that was held in my home that he was invited to. He left early, he didn't eat, but he was great in the church with all the group together when he didn't have to be personally there. He could be
Uh-huh.
the pastor.
He was.
And I found that's true in
Groups, but not
teachers.
one-on-one, small groups.
Yeah, it's how much of a heart you have that you're able to grow about who you are, to be there for your students and empower your students, along with the thought that the other teacher in the room there expressed earlier.
Mhm. Uh-huh. Vicky said churches have to be run like businesses because there's a lot of parts fit together. And it's hard for one person to have every gift. We all have different gifts. Sure. Yeah. Gene. It's okay. Mhm. Gene is talking about, go ahead, Gene. Mhm. Talking about our former pastor here, Harvey Martz, who was here for 18 years and built this new building. And it was a divisive issue, but also a very forward-looking issue for the congregation at that time. Mhm. Yeah. Ron says there's a big difference between a profit and a nonprofit. A church has to depend on its parishioners for money, and that affects the leader also. Yeah. I think it's interesting to look at pastors as leaders, where they're strong and where they're weak. And I know here some former pastors didn't watch their employees close enough, hold them to performance evaluations and goals. And there was the impression that some employees just didn't do much, didn't come in for many hours. And so that's been an issue in the past. And there's, right, a business manager like Lana is here now, a lawyer with business experience, because pastors are not good at that sometimes. Yeah, they're not good at managing staff, being tough on staff when they have to, and they don't want to. Their skills are other places. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting. Terry says there's also the question of, is the church working for the pastor or the pastor working for the church? Who's really in charge? Joy asked if there's a job description for the pastor. There is, sure. Yeah, yeah, there is, Joy. I used to be on the staff parish committee that hires the pastor with the conference, works on that. And there is a description for him and every employee here. Yeah. Small church pastors do everything, whereas a big church, they're more segmented. Yeah, yeah. It's a good question. Does everybody here go to the meeting where we discuss the pastor's salary and the goals for the church and all that? We haven't had it for a few years because it's moved over to St. Paul Church, the meeting where all that's discussed. Then I think it's to combine them as a conference. For some reason, it's easier as a conference to discuss those things in one meeting. Yep. If you go, you can vote on that. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Well, Zoom folks, I hope you are able to follow us here with our disjointed discussion. I know you can't hear people in the room, and I'm trying to repeat for you without being too rude to the people in the room here. But we hope it's not
Thank
too
you.
many weeks till we have our advanced technology here. You can hear everybody and see them as though you were sitting right here. So it's coming. It's
No,
still
it was fine, Steve.
good.
Thank you.
You, Susan. You bet. You bet. We're winding up
Yes,
here.
thank you, Steve,
You bet.
and everybody else.
You bet. Joyce, go ahead. Or
Oh,
Jean, go
thank
ahead.
you to you, Steve, and to everyone there.
Thank you. Sure. You said a good book on this is called Givers and Takers. The image of the take it versus the servant-oriented leader. This author found that the givers were more successful than the takers in meeting goals. Mhm. 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 Yeah, that's kind of a paradox. Well, that reminds me of the discussion about would a woman president be more effective because she would work better than an autocratic male president? You know, some people have said that. Confrontational style Maybe if Congress were all women and there was a woman president, we'd get along better. Some of the ladies here are going, no, don't think so.
To that point, the book
But Vicky's
talked
saying,
about earlier from the woman that wrote. Look at how many men's written book that, and I thought. you know,
Vicky
you can
says,
say
ladies
and
are
find
simpler.
things sometimes. I'm not a feminist. I'm just saying.
It's a good question. That reminds me too, Vicky, when your aunt was staying with us, Aunt Melba, 87 years old. I asked her what she thought of a woman president. She said, nope, I just don't think that would work. I think the men are meant to be president and the women shouldn't be. And I said, okay, I'm not going to argue with you about that, but I disagree. Ron likes praise from Dolly. Just another step on the boss man's ladder. What Dolly Parton said in 9 to 5. All good parts of leadership discussion. Well, thank you, everybody, today. And I just handed out a little handout to the folks here too that are called the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John C. Maxwell. And I'll just mention these so the folks on Zoom can see this too. It's just one more resource. It says the laws are: leaders are capped by their leadership ability. Number 2, leaders influence others. Number 3, leaders develop leadership ability over time. They get better, or should anyway. Leaders prepare and plan. Leaders serve others. They are trustworthy and have good character. Whoops, we haven't always had that. Leaders are respected, and people follow the strongest and most respected leader. Leaders pay attention to intangibles. Leaders attract people similar to themselves often. Leaders connect with others, and they build a leadership team. Leaders empower others, especially other leaders on their teams. They lead by example. Leaders are followed. Visions aren't. That was maybe disagreeing with what Blanchard said, but good question. Leaders never give up. Leaders harness momentum. Leaders prioritize and sacrifice. And the final 3 are: leaders factor in timing. Leaders lead other leaders, and leaders have a succession plan. As you were talking about, Gene, right?
Leaders inspire people to be better than they are.
They should. Yep, that's right. Okay. Lots of food for thought. Thank you for tuning in today to our little broadcast.
Thank
We
you,
will see you
Steve.
next week.
Bye.
Take care, Joyce. I was trying to remember what's next week. It is the church meeting too, but here in this class, it is Doug Knispel. Yeah, we have a friend here in the class. Doug Knispel is going to do a 2-week review on the great course called How Jesus Became God. So it's kind of a skeptic's look at how the early church developed their thought of Jesus' identity, and that he was not really thought of as God or part of the Trinity until 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea, when it was agreed that that's what his identity was. So be some discussion on that. Okay, pardon me? Doug Knispel. He is a member of the church here who works in the children's department and has done some classes with us in the past, including about firefighting.
He also works a lot.
Okay. Promise Keepers. He works with others too.
Keepers.
Family Promise. Yeah.
Big worker in
Okay, I want to let you go. Thank you all. Hi, Keith.
Thank
Nice
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Steve.
Take care,
Great week.
everybody.
Take
Have a
care.
good week.
Time.
You
Bye-bye.
too.